The night of my 68th birthday, my daughter slid a piece of paper across the dinner table, in front of 14 people, including my sister, my old friend from work, and my daughter's in-laws, and said, "We think it's time you looked into this, Dad, for everyone's sake." It was a brochure, glossy. Smiling white-haired people in a sunroom playing cards. Meadow Pines Senior Living Community. Rooms starting at $200 a month. I picked it up, set it back down. Looked at the candles on my birthday cake, still unlit, because nobody had gotten around to lighting them yet. Nobody said a word. I want to tell you the whole story, because what happened that night was not the beginning. It was the end of something that had been dying for almost 3 years. And what I did the morning after, that's what changed everything. My wife, Helen, I still reach for her name like it's in my coat pocket, passed away from pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2019, 17 months from diagnosis to funeral. We'd been married 41 years. She was the one who kept the house feeling like a house. After she was gone, it just felt like a building I slept in. My daughter, Carolyn, called me every Sunday for the first few months. She drove up from Raleigh on holidays. She cried at the kitchen table where her mother used to sit. I thought we were grieving together. What I didn't see, what I couldn't see, because I didn't want to, was that she and her husband were already making plans. Her husband, I'll call him what everyone called him, Spence, short for Spencer. He sold commercial real estate and had the personality of a firm handshake. Confident, smooth, and ultimately not something you wanted to hold on to too long. He'd always been polite to me. That particular kind of polite that keeps a door open without ever inviting you through it. In the fall of 2020, Carolyn asked if they could move in for a few months. Spence's company had restructured. They were between houses. Their youngest was starting at NC State in January, and they needed to get settled. She said it carefully, the way she used to ask permission as a teenager, framing the question so it was hard to say no without feeling like the villain. I said yes, of course I said yes. She was my daughter. This was her childhood home. The few months became 6, then 12. Then they stopped counting, and so did I. In the beginning, it was almost nice. The house had noise again. My grandson Oliver was home on weekends sometimes, sprawled on the couch watching football like his grandfather used to. Carolyn cooked on Sundays. The refrigerator had real food in it, but things shift. Slowly, so slowly you don't notice until you're already somewhere different. They took the master bedroom. Carolyn suggested it made more sense because they had more stuff, and I had been sleeping in the guest room anyway since Helen's side of the bed felt wrong. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just a room. They redecorated the living room. Carolyn said the old furniture was dated, and honestly, some of it was. I didn't argue. The new couch was nicer, I supposed. Spence started using my workshop in the garage for storage. My woodworking tools got pushed to one wall, then boxed. Then I couldn't find the box. I told myself people adjust, people compromise. That's what families do. What I didn't let myself think about was the money. Spence suggested early on that it was more efficient if household expenses ran through one account. He would manage it, he said. He was good with finances. I knew that. And I was tired, the way grief makes you tired in ways that have nothing to do with sleep. So I added him to my checking account, just for convenience, just for the utilities and groceries and such. I was still getting my pension from 31 years at the county transportation department. Decent money. Not lavish, but Helen and I had always lived below our means. We had savings. The house was paid off. I did not look at the statements closely enough. That is my fault. I own that. I want to be honest with you because that part matters. For almost 2 years, I looked at a big number and told myself everything was fine. I was 67 years old, I'd just lost my wife, my daughter was home, and I did not want to know what I was afraid I might find. What I eventually found, when I finally sat down with 12 months of statements and a yellow legal pad, was a lot. Dinner charges at a steakhouse on Falls of Noose Road that I'd never been to. A weekend at a resort in Asheville that I had not attended. Recurring charges to a wine subscription I hadn't signed up for. New tires for Spence's Escalade. A sectional sofa, not the one in the living room, a different one, which I later understood went to their storage unit. Grocery runs that seemed to double what 2 adults could consume. And dozens of smaller things, the kind that individually seem like mistakes until you line them up and they form a picture. I did not confront them. Not yet. I went back to looking at my legal pad for 3 days. I told myself I must be misremembering. I checked the statements again. I was not misremembering. I started quietly transferring money. Not everything, just enough to feel like I had a floor under me. And then came my birthday. Carolyn planned it. She told me she was throwing me a party, which I thought was generous. 68 isn't a milestone birthday, but I figured she wanted to do something nice. She invited people, some of my old colleagues, my sister Frances, the neighbors I'd known for 20 years, her own friends, her in-laws. I wore my good navy shirt. Helen had bought it for me the last Christmas she was well enough to shop. I ironed it myself. The table was set beautifully. Catered food from somewhere, real linens, candles. People were laughing. Someone brought a bottle of good bourbon. I remember thinking, maybe I had been too suspicious. Maybe I had let grief make me small and distrustful. Maybe this was Carolyn's way of saying she loved me. And then, after the main course was cleared, and the birthday cake was brought out, still unlit, Carolyn tapped her wine glass and said she wanted to say something. She talked about how hard the last few years had been, about how much the family had gone through, about how she and Spence had stepped up to take care of things. She was tearing up a little. People were nodding. Then she said that they'd been doing a lot of thinking, about the future, about what's best for everyone. She looked at me with this expression. I can only describe it as tender and final at the same time, like the face you make when you're putting a dog down. And Spence slid the brochure across the table. We think it's time you looked into this, Dad. For everyone's sake. Meadow Pines Senior Living Community. The table went quiet. I heard my sister Frances set her fork down. I saw my old work friend, a man named Alan Kowalski, who had driven 40 minutes to be there, look down at his plate. I picked up the brochure. I read the front. I set it back down. I said, okay. Just that. Okay. Carolyn looked relieved, which told me everything. She'd been afraid I would make a scene. She'd invited all these people as a buffer, as witnesses to my reasonable, gracious acceptance. We lit the candles. I blew them out. Someone cut the cake. I did not eat any. That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet and I could hear Spence watching something loud in the room that used to be mine, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I thought about 41 years of marriage and a woman who would have been furious on my behalf. I thought about my workshop tools in a box I couldn't find. I thought about a steakhouse on Falls of News Road. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. That was fine. At 7:15 the next morning, before either of them was awake, I was in my car. My first stop was the bank. I'd already made an appointment. I had called 2 days earlier, after my third night with the legal pad, when I finally accepted what I was looking at. I sat across from a branch manager named Patricia Osey, who had a kind face and a no-nonsense manner, and I told her what I needed. I removed Spence's name from my checking account. I opened a new account in my name only. I arranged for my pension direct deposit to go to the new account. I discussed, with specificity, the charges I had documented and what options I had. Ms. Osey was thorough. She flagged several transactions for review and gave me a reference number. I thanked her. I went to my car and I drove to my lawyer's office. I had called him the morning after I found the statements. His name is James Whitfield, and I've used him for estate work since the early 2000s. He's a careful man who asks the right questions. I told James what had happened, the informal arrangement, the account access, the charges. I told him about the brochure at the birthday dinner. James listened. Then he said, "You know the house is yours." I said I knew. He said, "They have no legal standing to remain if you ask them to leave." I said I understood that. He said, "How long do you want to give them?" I said, 60 days. James said he could do that. He drafted a formal notice of termination of occupancy, which is not an eviction in the legal sense because they'd never been formal tenants. It was a written request to vacate the property by a specified date. 60 days from that morning. He also drafted a letter to Spence regarding the financial matters, outlining what had been documented and what resolution we were prepared to pursue if the matter wasn't settled directly. He had both letters ready by noon. I drove to the house. It was 12:40 in the afternoon. Carolyn was in the kitchen eating lunch. Spence was at the kitchen table with his laptop. I sat down across from them. I put both envelopes on the table. I said, "I need you to read these." Carolyn looked at the envelopes. She looked at me. She said, "What is this?" I said, "Please read them." She opened hers first. I watched her face. The relief from the night before was gone very quickly. "Dad," her voice dropped. "Dad, you're asking us to leave?" I said yes. Spence opened his envelope. He read it. A muscle moved in his jaw. He set it down carefully. He said, "These charges, some of these were household expenses." I said I documented all of them. My lawyer has copies. You're welcome to discuss it with him directly. Carolyn pushed back from the table. She started crying, not the quiet, tearful kind, but the kind that fills a room, the loud grief of someone whose plan has stopped working. She said I was doing this because I didn't appreciate everything they'd done for me. She said I was being cruel. She said her mother would be heartbroken. That last part landed, the way she intended it to. I felt it in my chest. But I also remembered sitting at this same table with Helen, the two of us paying bills together, her writing the check amounts in her careful handwriting in the register. I remembered how she used to say that loving someone doesn't mean letting them treat you like you don't matter. I said, your mother would want me to take care of myself. That's what I'm doing. Carolyn cried harder. Spence sat very still and said nothing, which told me James's letter had been specific enough. I got up. I went to my room, the guest room, my room for the past 2.5 years, and I called Frances. She already knew something was wrong. She'd been quiet at dinner and called me that morning to check on me. When I told her what I'd done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Good. It's about time." The next 2 weeks were difficult. Carolyn came to my door twice to talk, and both times I sat with her and listened. I did not raise my voice. I did not list the charges again. I let her say what she needed to say, but I also did not change my position, and after the second conversation she seemed to understand that. Spence was another matter. His lawyer called James 3 times. James handled it. There was a settlement discussion about the documented charges. I did not get everything back. Some of it was simply not recoverable, but I got enough, and more importantly, James got it in writing. They were out in 51 days, 9 days early. The morning they left, I stood in the doorway of what was again my bedroom, and I looked at the stripped mattress and the bare walls, and I thought about everything that needed to be undone and redone. The furniture I'd replace, the space I'd reclaim. I found the box with my woodworking tools, pushed behind the water heater in the garage. Most of them were fine. Frances came down from Greensboro the following Saturday. We cooked dinner together, nothing fancy, chicken and vegetables and cornbread, and we ate at the kitchen table, and she told me stories about our parents that I hadn't thought about in years. Before she left, she hugged me at the door and said, "Helen would be proud of you." I didn't trust myself to say anything back. I just nodded. It's been 8 months since that birthday dinner. I'm in the workshop most mornings now. I've been building a blanket chest, old-fashioned, solid cherry wood, the kind of thing that takes patience. Carolyn and I have spoken 3 times. They're short conversations, careful, like learning to walk again after an injury. I don't know what will become. I hope, eventually, something real. But I'm not willing to pretend anymore just to make it easier on everyone else. The brochure is still in a drawer in the kitchen. I keep it there, not as bitterness. I'm trying to let go of that, but as a reminder of who I am when I stop paying attention. I am 68 years old. I own my home. I get up in the morning and make real coffee and go out to my workshop, and I build things that are meant to last. Nobody gets to hand me a piece of paper and tell me it's time to disappear.